I do think, and I know that Zach Lowe's been all over this, but the more I've thought about it, and I actually thought about in real time while I was going through the All NBA discussion, I eventually put him on my first team All NBA, is how much we overthink Jayson Tatum. And I
Yeah.
know like his three ball wasn't really falling in the conference finals. There's been more variance there this year on his jumper, but like you watch him and it feels like his biggest crime is that he's not, I guess you wouldn't call him dominant at any one thing, but he's borderline transcendent at everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's because he's just not super transcendent in this one area, like, or because he has a very good supporting cast, he's held to this weird, it's not even a high bar. It's like almost an impossible bar to reach because the way I'll frame it is this. So if the Timberwolves or the Mavericks reach the finals, or if they win the title, I think you can probably just pencil in, not that it'll be a reward for what they did, but kind of how he had already won an MVP, but kind of how the discourse on Jokic shifted last year to where if he would have lost in the finals or not reached the finals, I bet he doesn't win MVP this year. I'd probably bet you that Edwards and or Doncic would then finish or win MVP next year, just in the top, or at least in the top 5. Tatum, it feels like, okay, the Celtics could win the title. And unless he wins finals MVP, he's not going to get that same sort of bump. And he might just not even get that bump if that happens. And I understand there's things to quibble about with Tatum. And one of the things I think is so frustrating about him is when you look at the shot selection, sometimes how long things take in the shot clock when he has the ball or bailing out on drives. He's so good now and so well-rounded that everything feels like a choice. And so it's like, well, why did he settle for that? Because he could have done this, where it's not necessarily anything the defense has done or his teammates aren't doing. But when you're sitting there quibbling about, well, it's like, yeah, okay, he's improved as a playmaker, but like he's not good enough. And it's, well, then that's a flaw of the Celtics roster that they don't have that floor general if you don't think it's Jrue Holiday or Derek White. And I've just started to think about that more and more over the past, basically since the tail end of the regular season. And Zach Lowe framed it this way, where it's just like he might be the 6th or 7th best player, and people are mad that he's not the 4th or 5th best player.
You know, it's so interesting that you asked that. Like, I had the thought watching the game 4, I guess, of like watching Tatum operate, and I thought, like, why isn't Tatum one of my favorite players? Like, what? Like, it seems like he should be, because like
he's been only 19 for almost a decade. That's an incredible feat.
His ability to not age alone should endear him to all of us who are enduring the ravages of time. He just because, like, what do you need him to do? That, like, it's just the same question, because like he defends, like he gives effort, he seems like a good leader, he's never throws teammates under the bus, he is a good shooter, he can get to the basket, he's good at drawing fouls, like he's a willing like you just go down the list. And I think I'd never really thought of it, but you said like he's not dominant in any one way, but it's almost like he's an A- at everything. And it's the same thing you're saying, and that Zach Lowe is saying, is like he's really great, but somehow he's the one guy that it's like I don't feel like we hold like Devin Booker to this standard, or like Jimmy Butler, or Donovan Mitchell, or some other guys you might group in that like the back half of the top 10, or the 5 to 15 range in the league hierarchy. Like, why is he the guy that we're like dissatisfied that he's not an A+ at everything?
Do you think it's because he had so much success early on that when you look at, let's use Jokic as an example, is it was just like there was a very clear next step that didn't necessarily involve winning the title right away, but because he basically wakes up and is in the conference finals,
right?
It was, well, now it's like he just has to win the title or win MVP, and like that's the bar just from the jump that he's almost held to.
He really might be a victim of like a lot of early success. That's just like, it was never about like, okay, he's advanced to the next step and, oh, look at all this growth. It's like, well, you basically like started your career like on third base. Like, how come you haven't
scored? Get the home.
Like, like get there. Well, that's all you have to do. So if he wins a title and he wins finals MVP, how different is the conversation next year? And are we going to start saying like, well, where does he, like, do you even, because right now, I don't think you ask like, and we didn't in MVP voting. It was like SGA, Luka, Jokic, and I don't know, who do we have? I can't even remember who was fourth.
Brunson.
Like, Brunson. It was never like, well, let's do the Tatum versus Luka compare. Like nobody was like, we're not, that's not a real conversation yet. Like, does that then become a conversation? Like, does he get to that level, or are we always going to live in this, like, he's still an A-, good team around him thing?
I honestly think what hurts him, and I don't think it's fair, but when you're talking about the MVP discussion specifically, because the solo load he has to carry in theory is not as heavy because of how good and well balanced the Celtics are.
Yeah.
That's always going to hurt him in that discussion. But if you're talking about who is better, where it's just, so I framed it this way. I had Jalen Brunson. Did I have him 4th or 5th on my MVP ballot, but I didn't have him on first team All NBA. I gave that spot to Tatum because I just think Tatum is the better player. And look, if you're asking legitimately, if you want to start a team and have to build out your team from there, are you building around Jayson Tatum or Jalen Brunson? It's Jayson Tatum. That's just the end. Jalen Brunson made it a discussion, which kudos to Jalen Brunson for doing so. But like, that's, I think, the discussion that changes. Or I think, first of all, I think it should already change, because you want to say that Joel Embiid is better than Jayson Tatum. That's fucking cool. Availability is also a skill, and Jayson Tatum is as available as anyone. That needs to put him, again, if you're saying I need to start a team right now, I need to put him ahead of Embiid. He needs to put him ahead of Kawhi, and forget about the future stuff because ages would factor in, whatever. Tatum's only 19. That's going to benefit him. So, but like, honestly, go into that. So Jokic, you're taking over Tatum. Luka, I think you're definitely taking over Tatum.
Yeah.
Okay. Giannis? Like after that, it's Giannis. Is it like, here's the thing with Giannis, who is still one of the 5 best players in basketball, is you have to, and that's what makes Tatum so appealing.
Yeah.
Is there's limitations to then maybe his playmaking, let's say, but like there's going to be limitations to Giannis's playmaking, and it doesn't matter. I would say even maybe more so than Shea would be another name to throw in here. It doesn't, or Brunson, or whoever you want to throw, it really doesn't matter who you have around him, in a way that of everyone we just named, even Luka, like I think it kind of matters who you have around Luka.
Sure. Yeah.
Jokic, I don't think it matters. But like, is Tatum the only other guy where you look at it doesn't, like, among top 10 or 15 players where it doesn't matter who you put, like, you could, not that it doesn't matter, they need to be talented, but it could be any archetype of elite talent, and it just doesn't matter.
That's right. I mean, even Jokic, you'd say like you probably need like multiple good defenders around him, right? Great like point. I mean, certainly that was true in years past, less true now as he's improved, but like, no, like for Tatum,
also has multiple elite defenders around him.
Right. Also, have weird how that works. But like, no, that's really, you're dead on. Like for Tatum, if everybody else you mentioned, it's like, okay, we have this guy, so that means we definitely got to have some of this over here. Like, but if you have Tatum and you're starting the team, it's like, still got a blank canvas. Pick literally any type of player. He will not overlap. It's not like Tatum. It's like Tatum is going to take away from this guy in any way. And that goes back to like the A- at everything. Like, and really that might undersell him. He might just be a flat A at some stuff and A+ at other things. But like, he's the most scalable superstar we have. Maybe that's the way to put it. Like you could put him on any team in any role and he would add value.
Yeah. I think I'm with, that's the best way to frame it there. And it's like, when you're talking about what's the A+ skill, I still think like, when you're talking about would you want to take like an off the dribble 3-pointer? I know the percentages don't necessarily back it up. You're probably still counting the number of players who you'd prefer over him there on one hand. Right.
Because he's going to get it off. Like that's the other thing. He's an enormous wing. Like that, just the size alone is like a huge asset over someone like Booker, for example.
Because he doesn't need to check the second best assignment every night. Like he's criticized for like, well, how elite is he really if it's like he doesn't have to do that?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not really rooting for any of these teams necessarily. Like, I don't have like a favorite, but like, I think if Tatum and the Celtics were to win it, it would kind of feel, I don't know, it'd be like, I'd be okay with that because we can like maybe close the book on some of the dumb stuff that we've thought about.
The problem is we won't. And I think it'll come, he has to win. And I'm not saying this is right, but he probably has to win finals MVP and by like a clear margin to where, look at the conference finals where it's, well, it could have been Drew, it could have been Tatum, it could have been Jalen. Yeah. There can't be any of that because people will use that as like some means to discredit him. Like, well, let's see him do it if you take one of these, like, or two of these guys off the team.
Yeah.
And so I think it's not just that the Celtics need to win the title, that he needs to win finals MVP. If we're looking for a meaningful shift in the way that he has talked about nationally on the some of the podcasts that you or I might pay attention to and actually assign value to, and then some of the talking heads that we don't really listen to, but other people get bent out of shape from. Like, it needs to be a comfortable finals MVP victory. And they also need to, it can't be, oh, he won finals MVP, but they lost the finals and like barely anyone's ever, no, it needs to be a championship and a comfortable finals MVP.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, I think that's correct. but like, you're not making this argument. We keep doing this where it's like, I know you're not saying this, but it's being,
and it's funny because we know after all these years, we're not saying it for either one of our benefits.
Right.
It's just like we're saying it for people listening who probably don't give a fuck.
But the idea of all of the, if you just reverse it and it's like, just ask the question, if you took Drew Holiday off the Celtics, would that foreclose a chance of winning a title? Like, yeah, probably. Derek White, yeah. Like, no, they could get by. Porzingis, they just swept the team without Porzingis. Derek White, like, yeah, they could, probably get there. Jaylen Brown, even, like, maybe. But if you take Tatum off the Celtics, it's like, well, suddenly he doesn't seem quite so dispensable or like interchangeable with all these other good players on the team. It's like, no, clearly that's the guy on the team. It's just, if you reverse it, suddenly all the stuff of like, well, he's good and all, but he's not. It's like, no, he is vital. He's the single most important player on the best team in the league. Like, it's not, I don't feel like that's actually debatable at this point, although certainly it's made to seem that way sometimes.
Well, it's not Derek White's not the most important player of this
team.
Well,
isn't that a thing? Like, all year, everybody's rushing to be like, who really has changed things for the Celtics? And it's like, it would never be Jayson Tatum. It would just be some other guy. If Porzingis had his moment, Derek White, all great players, Drew Holiday, but it's like Tatum's the best player on this team. And this is the best team in the league all year. And certainly looks like it in the playoffs. At some point we're overthinking this if we're denigrating Tatum like at all.
And it's our inability to not be able to just separate his value from the fact, okay, yes, he has this supporting cast, but he can have value independent. I don't understand why we can't. Okay, like, yeah, there are some luxuries that he's afforded, but then there's also just some luxuries that he's not. Like, think about it this way. And I don't think he deserves credit for Jaylen Brown's success the way that, and this is going to come across terrible, like the way that Jamal Murray should probably give Jokic a cut of all his contracts moving forward. But at the same time, is Jaylen Brown as good without if you were to remove, to frame it this way, you put Jayson Tatum without Jaylen Brown on a different roster versus putting Jaylen Brown on that same roster without Jayson Tatum, who's going to be the better player? What is the better chance of being the better team? And the answer is clearly Tatum.
Yeah.
And I think you can do that with anyone else on this roster. And the other thing is just like, folks, and I'm not talking to anyone in particular, and not you, because we have to use that clarifier. We have on-off data. Like,
right.
Do you know what the Celtics net rating was when Tatum played without Derek White, Jaylen Brown, and Drew Holiday?
Was it double digits? I bet it
19.1
was. Oh, Jesus.
So, and it's just like, I understand it's a small sample size, but like, come on, that's right. Like, we have that right in front of, that's so accessible. Yeah. So I didn't think that this was going to turn into a Jayson Tatum underrated / underappreciated discussion, but it did. And I think we're both in agreement that yes, he is.
Yeah, here we are.